Yeah, so 6:31, we can call the meeting to order.
And then next agenda item is the citizen forum, and then we have no one signed up for that.
Okay. And then the next item to approve the previous minutes.
So we'll need a motion.
I move to approve previous meeting minutes.
A second.
Second.
And then all in favor? Okay. Minutes are approved.
Okay. So the primary objective on the agenda, which I closed an accident, so you can rein me into if needed, but is to talk about the climate action pillar. And so I have done some independent fact finding, kind of digging around, trying to figure out the primary thing was what fits that pillar. And then the second thing was, what do we as within our charter, within our authority, what do we have the authority to suggest that the city look at implementing? So those were the two primary drivers to what topics that we want to add for this pillar to present to the board in the future. So I came up with two things at a high level. The rating system for existing buildings, government buildings, and then topics surrounding education. And Ramesh was kind of co-sponsor on the topic. And do you have anything outside of that?
And Aaron, it's so bad that I did not actually collaborate with you. I kept postponing it, and this morning I woke up in a panic and put something together. So let me share my screen. Ooh, I can't do share screening. All right. So let me share what I have captured here. So my understanding was we were supposed to review the recommendation for Vision 2040 and highlight what was relevant for the climate change and green initiative, and then look a little bit on the stuff being done by other cities or research papers and come up with a couple of suggestions. So that is what I have done. Aaron, do you want me to just share via email later on, or do you want me to talk about them now?
So Julie will allow you to share if you want to go ahead and share.
Yeah,
okay.
You're enabled now.
All right, thank you. All right, let me share my screen. All right, are you guys able to see my screen?
There it is. Yep.
So the first section was the Vision 2040 recommendation. There were three bullets that I felt were applicable. I won't go into all the details behind it. I think if you have a copy of the 2040, you can read it yourself. And I'll share this document so you can read that. Some of the research that I did was I looked at the McKinsey. There's an let me try to get the name for you guys. McKinsey published a report on smart cities. So I read most of it and came up with a few ideas. And pretty much high level, they're talking about distributed energy generation. What this actually means is they're saying that homes will get together in micro communities, and they will generate energy as a combined entity. And when it is possible, they will give excess energy back to the grid. So it's a little bit of growing what you need and consuming what you need. So the localization as well as helping out the grid. Then in terms of traffic changes, what they said is with better smart meters, the trend will be to cut down more of the greenhouse gas due to idling and wasted time spending in front of traffic signals. And then finally, they had this acknowledgement that finally people will acknowledge that humans are causing climate change, and they will take steps to reverse the direction. So in terms of recommendation and finding, some of the things that I was able to find from other cities is that citizens will demand eco-friendly energy source. So the city should make policies that will enable the citizens to have those eco-friendly energy sources. And the city should take action so that renewable energy sources like solar account for 25% plus of their supply. And some of the things the city can be doing is be carbon neutral by 2045. So that's I don't know if it's an aggressive enough goal, but that's something that they should work towards. And I looked at the existing 2040. So, Vision 2040 had water recapture 80% by 2040. So we're changing it to 95% by 2045. And likewise, recycling, the target is 75% by 2020. And maybe we can target 90% by 2045. So those were some of the specifics that I came up with.
Okay, good. Yeah, traffic keeps coming up, and I personally steered away from it, wanting to give it full attention in Pillar 3. Congestion and automation, congestion, autonomous vehicles. Also had a conversation with Jared that we're going to look to have the head of that department come and speak to us so that we can hear from the city what exactly they are doing, so that we can then better formulate what we feel they should be targeting for the future. You had one on here. So the reductions in energy consumption really start with measuring where we're at today. I think that's where we tie into the building certifications. We have 2 buildings here in Coppell, the Biodiversity Center and the Senior Center, that were certified LEED when they were built. And Jared was going to look into when those were up for recertification. But I think so certification on a new construction is a whole different animal than certification on an existing building. Certification on an existing building requires a deep level of policies and documentation. And so I think that's where the city could start putting the best foot forward now, is to develop those policies. The policies surrounding landscaping, the chemicals used in and out of the building, how much fresh air, clean air they're bringing into the HVAC for cooling and heating. And just policies around picking the right type of materials for any renovations moving forward. If they were to develop those policies now, we would be eligible, even in an older building, would be eligible for some level of certification, not necessarily LEED, for most buildings going forward. And Energy Star actually has a energy rating system that they have for buildings, where you submit your data and they aggregate that along with the stats, the building statistics, and you can get your buildings Energy Star certified online, and then that gets validated by a PE, and that's really the easiest and first step to certifying an existing building.
And Aaron, these are all things that you predict will happen past 2040, right?
But yeah, to start now, to certify an existing municipality, all the buildings would take several years and several years of initiatives, because you can't just throw a policy in place and then certify buildings. So it would take many years. It would take several years to get to a place where all of our buildings and infrastructure are seeking certification of some level.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts on
Yeah.
on that piece, certifying buildings?
I think Patrick has his hand raised.
I mean, I think that's a really great goal. And I mean, I had in my notes here, I'd been like, the more buildings we could get that are LEED certified that the city owns, that's great. And that's a really great goal to have for the city. For the city, the school district's done it with the Lee Elementary School and the new West Middle School are both LEED certified. And I think that's a really great goal on that. I think pushing the education side, as Ramesh was saying, is also key. Let me give you a really simple one on water recapture, though, that I'll bet the city is not doing, that I'm doing at my house, which is I have 5 rain barrels on my property to capture rainwater to go in my garden and water the grass and the rest. So, Jared, I don't think there's any rain barrels over at City Hall, even though you've got a community garden. Is that correct?
There are rain barrels on that little building, a little shed.
How many?
Just probably like one. It's a small shed. You know what I mean?
But the point is, you could. It wouldn't be that hard to capture all the rainwater that falls on City Hall and put it in rain barrels and run a hose across to that community garden and never have to spend any money on water for that community garden. And so part of the education piece I think of with this is it's not just the education of getting people to be smart with, civic space water capture. It's also then continuing to do that. I mean, the reason we have those rain barrels was actually a city program. The Biodiversity Education Center did a whole program where you went to City Hall, you were there in the parking lot, they showed you how to plumb the barrel and how to hook it up at your house. I don't know that they've done that recently, but I mean, the more of that we do and we have people capture all that rainwater and use that to water their gardens and their lawns rather than using, the municipal water source, that's a great idea. And there's lots of smart ways to do that. So anything we can do that encourages that or encourages the city to continue to do that program, because they did it with Texas A&M and the ag extension from Texas A&M that's over in Richardson. Jared, you probably know where that is over there because I know you live over there.
I know exactly where that is.
Patrick, I read that in the Vision 2040, and they actually identified an action item where they recommended that all of those shipping places that we have to the west of Coppell, that we the large acres of flat top roof, they said let's collect water from those flat top roof. So it is already captured in the 2040 plan, and that is why I didn't include it.
But Ramesh, then you have to then move that gray water around, right? I can control moving it around on my property because basically, literally, I mean, it's the other side of the wall where I'm talking to you from. I have 4 rain barrels and they're mounted up on cinder blocks. So they get, so they're fed by gravity. Right? And so I can hook a garden hose up to them and I can take it to the garden that's just the other side of this wall and I can use it to water my asparagus.
Yep.
But the more of that stuff you encourage, there's ways the city can be active in encouraging those sorts of programs, because I want to say when we got those barrels and we did that program, I think the barrels cost $30 a pop. And then I probably have spent another $100 plumbing them into each other and into my downspout. And literally the last time we had to total the roof and put new downspouts in, when the guy came to put the new gutters in, I made him put the fitting in that captures all the water. So that sort of stuff and programs like that where, we have the people come over from the A&M extension. We reach out and show people, hey, here's where you get the gutter connection, right? And here's how you cut your gutter open and put the thing in so that you can capture the water and hook it in, and the other big expense I've had the whole time is the pipe that comes off the gutter that goes into the rain barrel fails every so many years because it gets full of sediment from the roof and from granules. And so I have to go over to Ace and buy a piece of hose. But that's a really critical one in terms of like the water recapture thing. And that's a civic education thing. Like we can do that. And the city has people, it's us working with or talking with the people from the Biodiversity Education Center about how to do that and work either, you do classes out there. You think about going out there, you could go out to Wagon Wheel. You could have a couple hundred people out there picking up rain barrels at the same time.
Yeah. That was, education was kind of the second pillar that I was headed down. Right. Can we circle back on the certification of the buildings and see if anybody has comment on that, so then we can close that piece out.
I have a point, Aaron. So today we talk about like LEED certification being a benchmark, right? I fully predict that by 2040 there will be something much higher or stringent than LEED. So what are we telling the city today to say that, hey, maybe you should target being 30% more stringent than LEED today? Is that what we are recommending?
Yeah, LEED itself in the commercial sector is moving the opposite direction to make it easier. They're going to a product called ARC, and LEED has been a 5-year certification, and it takes 4 years of tracking, then a year of testing, and then you achieve the certification. But ARC is an annual certification, and what they want is more data. They're looking for more building data, more usage data, and so the USGBC is the the entity that manages this, and they want more of their buildings hooked into their systems, and so they're coming out with the ARC certification, and that's an annual process. It doesn't mean that there won't always be an elite product, but they're looking for more participation from more people. Even if a building was built and it's not capable of getting a LEED certification, there will be an ARC equivalent that is simply tied to their policies for new construction, new renovation, and then energy consumption.
Okay.
And Energy Guard is doing has that same mindset of annual certification based on consumption. And the consumption factors, you have your actual consumption, but then you have the number of people, the number of computers, the type of tenants, retail location or restaurant. All those factors lead into building your Energy Star certification. And so that would be a basis point for us to start, so that we could show as a city we've moved from energy consumption A to to 70% of that in 8 years from now.
So what we are saying is that we agree that there will be a trend towards decreased energy consumption by both commercial and residential buildings. So is there a specific guideline we are giving to the city? Are we telling them, because they kind of sort of know that is the case, what are we specifically telling them for 2040 and beyond?
I don't know if you saying that there's a goal of X% reduction is something that we can do from our position. We know we have 2 highly efficient buildings that are currently LEED, and they were LEED Gold, so there's room to go to LEED Platinum. And so there is room for improvement even with an existing LEED building, but without knowing where the other buildings sit, it'd be hard to say that the city should, because I don't know if the city's already put in LED bulbs across the board. I don't know if they've already put in occupancy sensors to help mitigate unnecessary HVAC. There's all these things that could then lead to reduction, but not knowing where they're at today, make it hard to say a blanket, 15% reduction.
I would agree with that. I mean, I can tell you that we've done a lot of things. Have we done everything? No. Is there more that we could be doing? Perhaps. To Patrick's point, water capture. Outside of the Biodiversity Center, I think that's the only building that actually captures rainwater runoff, and that big cistern right in front of the building. Beyond that, we have, of course, retention ponds and things like that, but not necessarily capturing directly off a building. We do have occupancy sensors, water shutoffs for irrigation controls, those types of things that are pretty standard today. We shared a link that's got a lot of the green policies. Some of those have been in place for a lot of years. There's a lot of things that are in there, everything from idling policies to zero-scape kind of scenario where we don't water as much. So if you notice, right, the medians in Coppell, majority of them are all zero-scape. So we don't spend a lot of time mowing or irrigating them. All those things are kind of today. And so I agree that the buildings, really, we've never shot for any type of certification other than those 2 projects you identified that I recall. So recertification of buildings, or at least looking to getting them to a score to where we're capturing data on the buildings, I think that's important. I think there's a good recommendation that comes from that. The percentage piece for mesh, I don't know how you, to your point, what is going to be in 20 years, 30 years the score of choice. If it's going away from LEED and ARC is now taking over, is there what's the next one? But the bigger piece of that for me that I hear you guys say is capturing the data. I know Aaron and I had that conversation. I think capturing the data related to the buildings at least gives us the ability to say where we are today and what we're doing in the future. And hopefully we have a trend that's improving, right? So the occupancy sensors, I think, are only for electrical, for lighting, and not for HVAC. So I don't know that we've tied it directly to the HVAC, but definitely to lighting. We're not LED everywhere in all our buildings. A lot of the exterior lights are LED today. Interior have been, we reduced from T12 to T8s a million years ago. And now I want to say we've even reduced to a more efficient bulb, but it's still a fixture and bulb, not an LED. Like I said, and that's that's like Town Center, 265. Some of the newer construction, the Fire Station 4, I believe that has more LEDs in it than anywhere else, because obviously it's a brand new build. But to your point, when we built Fire Station 4, we were not targeting any type of certification on the building. So that had we had like a scenario where there was a recommendation to do that, perhaps we would have in that build. So.
Yeah, so that's where I think our role is to recommend that the city implement the policy to all new buildings get certified, whether it's LEED or another applicable certification, and then adopt policies to begin tracking consumption and also putting in place the policies at the existing buildings or the maintenance programs that would qualify for LEED if they were to pursue that on existing buildings moving forward. Any thoughts, Kaylin or Aaron?
Go ahead, Patrick. I know you had your hand raised. Whatever that is.
The one thing I would point out in this, and someone else may be able to confirm this for me, but the legislature passed a law in the last session that basically stripped cities from part of their ability to set zoning requirements. And so some of these things we're recommending here are going to be asking the city to do something more than what's required under state law. And I'm putting that out there because I think the city council will go along with what we're suggesting, because I think we've got that progressive of a city council, and hopefully with whoever else gets elected to these new seats and the rest on it, they'll be of the same mind. But I'm just pointing out that those ability to set building standards, like to build a building to a LEED standard, and how much control we have. Like I looked over those slides that were part of the agenda stuff that got put together, and I really wonder, like, how much control can we ask over what's on slides 8 and 9 of that stuff? And then the other is just the technical issue, which is, we've been talking here about energy consumption. It's one thing for the city to ask about water consumption, right? And then to say to people, oh, we'd like you to capture your gray water and use it to water your lawns instead of using city water, that we have to buy from the Dallas water utility. We don't have access to the electric meter data.
We have our own bill, so that what the city has control over, they have access to their buildings.
Right. So we can make recommendations for the city buildings. It just doesn't carry over to private property is what I'm pointing out.
Yeah, every time I went down the path and hit a roadblock, that was the exact, we don't have the authority to mandate a lot of the decisions of the constituents. And so with that said, the city should be the first leader in that thought process. And so if the city can put it out there, you're pushing forward with these initiatives. But you're right, Patrick, it's not, we can't push that into the private sector.
Right.
And I don't know the difference between Coppell and Dallas, but the commercial building code in Dallas, you just meeting the commercial building code, you will have a LEED eligible building. You need to add on top of that all of the documentation and reporting, which could add up to $100,000 additional projects. So, but the minimum standards in Dallas, City of Dallas, will get you to a LEED eligible building.
So, if I have to look into my crystal ball, if this documentation is such an issue, let's go into this fantasy world. By 2040, all of the meters will be digitally talking to each other, and the documentation required can actually be collected by an app that sends it off to the regulatory authority. So maybe that would not be a huge effort by 2040. I've been smoking, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry. Very inappropriate comment for a city meeting. I'm sorry. I was
All
joking.
good. Yeah, but you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, I do think, again, so that's where I feel like we as the Smart City Board could make a recommendation to start to capture data today, because if we're already starting down that path, that leads the trend of where we are looking at the next. So I'll use the water meters, for example. Right, we're using smart meters today. We will have them in play for, their life is 20 years, but as they start to get close to age out, we'll probably look at the next smart meter. And what is that? How much data comes off of that? If they're doing every 5 seconds now, it's going to be every second. And it's going to actually store the data in the meter, and not actually push to the cloud. And there's lots of different things that potentially happen. And so if we are saying, so I think the biggest thing from what Patrick said and what Aaron said is we need to differentiate, obviously, what the city and the city buildings can actually do versus the residential side. We can lead by example, but obviously we'll not be able to impose any building restrictions that are specifically now with the state being less, or giving us less authority to drive those decisions. We still can't make the homeowner do X, Y, Z. It's still going to be a choice. And so that's where we lean to the other pillar that Aaron talked about, which is the education side. And so we can lead by example and we can provide education and then hope that folks make good choices.
Yeah. So that overlap with what Ramesh presented and what I had on my list was, as a board, what do we want to present as a recommendation for education? I feel like there's pockets of education happening, and I think we keep coming back around and round to on our chart with Smart City, the community engagement platform is what feeds the pillars. And I think that would be the catalyst for an education program. But what is the city? What do we want to ask the city to do as far as incentivizing participation in these education programs? Do we add, to Patrick's point, do we ask the city to provide the rain barrels? What do we want to look at as far as education itself? I know some of the schools have recycling education. I don't know for a fact what each school has, and we don't have authority over the schools, but the city can partner with the schools for sure. If that was an initiative, I think the kids really enjoy the recycling. They even went on a tour of the recycling center. And so Wilson is doing a good job of bringing that together. But is Coppell ISD in total doing that? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, and my thought too is like last week or last month when I asked Jared, what are we actually supposed to be proposing? And he said, robots or whatever. Like, we don't have to come up with the specific ways to implement whatever we're wanting. We can just go to the council with, here's our thoughts. We want to do X, Y, Z. We want to give people an incentive to do X, Y, Z. We don't know what that is, but this, because they would probably know better that type of stuff than we would.
Yeah, I mean, if that's for sure. I mean, it would definitely be a council decision to incentivize anybody to do anything. But if we came to them and said, we think rain barrels are a great idea and everybody in Coppell should have a rain barrel and we think the city should fund that, we can make that recommendation. It's up to council to say yay or nay. And of course, staff would go get prices on rain barrels. But
And I would say the same thing about, we're talking about the cost and what it would take to actually do all of that. I don't think we need to really worry about that either, because like Jared said, we say, here's our ideas. They go price it out. The council says yes or no, and we've done what we're supposed to do.
Right. Exactly.
One thing I've looked at personally is energy and battery storage at my house. Um, so as far as an education program and layering that in with a incentive, having the city incentivize an energy distribution system by removing the costs of the permits necessary to put batteries in your house. Those would be some incentives, purchasing the rain barrel, or just reducing the cost of a permit to implement solar and or battery storage at individuals' houses. So the education on what you need and what it'll provide for you is very interesting. Solar in itself is useless when you don't have the little tiny bit of power that it takes to run the converter, from the energy you create to the energy you can use. So anyways, that's any thoughts on the education side? Do we ask the city to develop and publish an education program annually? And
I mean, I think it could be even more simple than that. Like, let's go to Patrick's house and do a YouTube video that shows his barrels and post it on the, like, people love that stuff, like, hey, we're at Patrick's house, check out these rain barrels, like something not so boring and like city municipal-ish.
Yes,
like, just something that can, something that can get people interested. Cause like when he was talking about it, I was interested. I'm like, that sounds cool. Let's do that. So we could do like little mini, whatever those are called, podcasts or videos or whatever, for the city, or put them wherever. Cause I'm sure that the city has people that can produce that kind of stuff. And
because Aaron, literally, when we got the rain barrels, my wife and I drove over in separate cars so that we could bring the first two home, so that we could put them in. So, that program, at least for us, worked really well for this sort of thing. I mean, back on the battery thing, the way the slides are written, it's like almost looks like we want the city to do a battery facility. And I don't think that's the way we necessarily want to present it. Because I think, Aaron, it's more likely, like you were just saying, we want to have it where people put solar in, or they have their own battery system to capture energy from some source. And we want to make it easily permittable for them to do that and install that in their garage or on the side of their house or the rest. Because one of my first questions I wrote down when I looked at those slides was, there was this whole thing about like a battery facility. And I'm like, well, where are we going to put that? Because there's really nowhere around in town to put that. I see Jared nodding there, So I think we've got to think about that side as more like people getting their own Tesla battery packs in their houses. And how do we make it really easy for them to do that? So that their electrician can come in, wire that thing in, get that thing set up. I mean, I honestly, after the freeze and the lack of power and the rest, I actually was looking at my own property and I was like, where and how can I put in like a generator? Which is not a common thing to do around here. But my father lives in an area where they get hurricanes. And so he has a generator because their power goes out and it can be out for a week, But that's the first time after we went through that the other week where I was looking, going, where can I put a generator on my property? And I don't mean a like gas powered generator, a gasoline powered generator that I can maybe run my refrigerator or a few things on. I'm talking about a generator I could run my whole house on.
Right.
And so you've got those issues coming up about how to manage energy and the rest of it. The other one in the slides that I saw that I think probably needs a little attention and is going to need a little more research is, and it's well documented in there. So when you made the slides, I appreciated it, is the cost of cement and how much energy goes into making cement. You know, and you think about the roads here in Coppell. I mean, we have invested in building almost all of our roads in cement, you know, which is an incredible thing to do because a lot of communities don't do that. I mean, I will say for a lot of other communities I've lived in over my life, we had a lot of asphalt roads. We didn't have, you know, the main roads were cement, but pretty much, you know, here in Coppell, everything is concrete, you know, which is good for durability. It's good for the Texas summer heat, but it has a real environmental impact and cost. And so one thing I think probably needs to be documented in there for city council, because you've got a bunch of engineers and you have an architect on city council, is you better document the difference in the price of using a more environmentally sensitive product than a standard, you know, limestone cement.
Right.
And I think, you know, it falls to, you know, either Aaron, you can document it, Jared can document it, but I think we're going to have to document to them because they're going to have to know this, because all the money we spend on cement in Coppell comes out of the CRDC fund, right? That's what pays for the alleys. That's what pays for the roads. That what pays for the pathways in the parks and all that stuff. And so we're going to have to be able to document to them that if we want to, if we're going to recommend, you're going to go with a more environmentally sensitive, you know, climate sensitive product, how much more is that going to cost the city over the next 10 years, 15 years? Like, that's got to be documented to them so that they know when they put out a bid, the bid's going to look high compared to other ones. That's going to go into the bid cost. And so I think that for us as a committee, that needs to be part of the information that gets documented to them, which is, you know, how much more does that cost per cubic yard?
Right.
Yeah. So a couple of questions, Patrick. The slide deck you're referencing, is that the presentation we made to council? Is that the one you're referencing, or is there another slide deck?
This is the one.
I think it's the one Jeff made.
It's the one Jeff made in December. Yeah. It's the one that's
the trial one.
Yeah, the trial one.
Okay.
Yeah, I went back and was looking at that today. You know, just given that we were talking about all this environmental stuff and the rest, I went back and looked at that one and the link that's in there for it. And I think it's just important to document a few of these other things about that, just so that when this goes forward, there's knowledge there. Because, I mean, one of the things the political scientist in me knows we're about to crash into, we're going to have a new mayor and we're going to have 3 new city council persons. Potentially. You know, maybe some will get reelected, but we're going to have a big new number of people. And so we need to have these things documented so that when they're there and they're looking at it and evaluating it, they've got the knowledge that comes from that.
I might be late to this party, but are we presenting something to them, our proposal or whatever, like periodically as we go through these pillars? Are we doing it all at the end? What's the plan?
So the original conversation was that we would do this at the end. We would do a presentation in October, November timeframe. However, we have the freedom to do it as if we get to a place where we feel like we're ready to present some information, we absolutely can. I just need to work with Mike to get it on the agenda. But the original thought process was we would put these recommendations together and present it as a kind of all the portfolios is the way I understood it to be, or as many as we had gotten done. Let me put it that way.
And so are we coming up with after this one, we're going to collectively decide what that's going to be?
Yes. I think that's the goal. Patrick, I do want to go back real quick and just clarify something. CRDC funds mostly parks related concrete, but not all road infrastructure. There's an IMF fund and some other places that fund those. Right. But to your point, we do need to document, if we'd like, this when we bid it with the alternative, asphalt overlay or whatever, fly ash in the concrete, whatever our recommendation is to reduce that footprint, we can get that documented and we can make that as a recommendation.
Hey, and as a kid who grew up around steel mills, I know the value of putting fly ash in your concrete. It's a great way to use up the slag from a steel mill.
Right.
So there actually is some environmental benefit from putting fly ash in your concrete.
Right. And I know just the history there. We looked at it years ago. This was with the previous city engineer who has since retired. I don't know that we've gone back and reevaluated the use of fly ash. I know that asphalt has aesthetically is not liked by most. So that's another reason why we stick to concrete in Coppell. But the useful life of concrete is longer than most of those other materials. Another reason why we invest in that so it lasts longer. So that's the.
So then, Jared, replacing all the bulbs with LED bulbs, is that something we would want to suggest, or they kind of already know they should do that?
Yeah, so we are following. We were required by I don't remember which legislation session years ago to start to reduce our environmental footprint in lots of different ways. Power was one of them, which is why I think when Aaron brought up the interesting notion of certifying the buildings, we would actually then, if we started to do that, you would actually start to see a reduction. So the way if you were to ask me what our power reduction is from 2005 to today, I would have to go back through utility bills because that's really the only way we're capturing that. And so, to me, that's one of those things that if we started to really look for the opportunity to capture the data and record it so we can meet that certification, whatever that program would look like, but then we could actually kind of say, and here's what we have done. When we changed out the T12s to T8s, this is the reduction in power we saw. Then when we go from T8s to LED, here's the reduction in power that we saw. LEDs, you go back 5-6 years ago, LED bulb was too expensive to do out through an entire building. The cost wasn't there to recover because the price of electricity for us is relatively inexpensive in Texas. When we were paying 4 cents a kilowatt hour, and that's with green credits, that's pretty inexpensive. And so the cost to benefit wasn't necessarily there then. But then again, these are all those conversations we have to have, cost versus benefit from an environmental perspective is different. It's a different equation than you're just looking at straight dollars.
So Aaron Bogdanovich, I hope I got your name correct. So the two things that I always keep trying to remind myself. One, I think as the Smart City Council, we are focused on what the city should be doing 2040 and beyond. Because there's already a Vision 2040 document done, and the city has their marching orders on what they need to do up to 2040. So our focus is recommending ideas 2040 and beyond. And the second is, and I've been told this very nicely but firmly, we need not worry about how the city is going to implement it. That's Jared's problem. He's going to have to figure it out. We just have to tell them, hey, here is what we think is going to happen, and you need to find a way to figure it out. And Jared may come back and say, this does not make cost effective sense, and that's for the city to decide. But our job is to just recommend. So
Ramesh, on your first point, I was going to ask this earlier. I know we talked about this last month, but can we get confirmation around the group that we're set for now to 2040? I was looking back through the material and I didn't see like a full plan for now to 2040. So is that someone else is doing that? Is that why we're not doing that? Or is the city expecting us to still continue to provide suggestions? Or are we truly supposed to ignore now to 2040?
Yeah. So it's kind of both a little bit. There is the 2040 plan is in place today, and council has, the existing council has prioritize the things within the portfolio that staff is now taking action on, and that will occur over the next, however many years. So the goal really however, what I will say is the council, when they created this group, realized that they don't know everything there is to know about Smart City, and they are looking for recommendations for the city related to Smart City initiatives. And so that's where we were formed. And then, so our goal is it is to look at 2040 and focus on what the future looks like, because there are things that are happening today. So I'll use an example, traffic management. We don't need to spend a whole lot of time talking specifically about traffic management for today, because we are involved in a lot of programs and doing a lot of things. It is really looking at traffic management in 2040 if we're looking to have fully autonomous cars, or even flying vehicles, or whatever 2040 happens to bring us. What are the things that this board can recommend for Coppell to prepare for today for that kind of scenario? We're supposed to be more futurists on this scenario. I mean, we are definitely focused further out than on today. So when we talk education, and even when we're talking rain barrels, we're talking education programs that are to prepare citizens for 2040 down the way. We can make recommendations, but those are those things that need to be prepared. I mean, recommendations really focused for the future, and not necessarily for doing rain barrels at Earthfest in 2 weeks or whatever it is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I've been taking notes. I'm trying to collate like all the ideas and the discussion points. And it feels to me like we're jumping
right
back and forth between now and later, and 10 years from now, and 15 years from now, and 5 years from now. And I'm just having trouble synthesizing what we would tell the city and how we would organize our ideas. Because some of them do feel very necessary, for the record, very good ideas, but they feel more short-term than long-term.
And Galen, and that is why when I shared my brief findings, I first went through what is already covered in Coppell 2040 vision. So a team has said, here are things you should focus on. I felt like, okay, if that is covered and we don't have anything new to add to that, we should focus on other things. And because 2040 is so far beyond, and we have a tendency to see the near and dear problem, sometimes we do talk about stuff we could be doing right away. And then I think, and that is why I'm playing the scope cop. I keep saying, and sometimes I'm wrong, and then you guys will tell me when I'm wrong. So that's all I have.
No, I appreciate it, Ramesh, because that's I too get caught up in today, because that's what I work in it every day, and so I appreciate the comment. But yes, the goal really is to look at climate change in the future, policies and programs that we can do for future related activities, and which is why I think when we originally the group was centered around making generic recommendations, and it wasn't specific. We should do any specific solution. It was, by this date, city should perhaps reduce by this percentage, whatever that percentage was, or should just be continuing to reduce. I mean, it can be relatively generic in the recommendation, but it could be pointed at a certain kind of look at city facilities, for example, with Aaron. These cities should focus on their facilities and making sure that they are continuing to capture data and, keep up with environmental friendly solutions. I mean, that's very generic, but it's a recommendation that would be future oriented. And then from there, we could make tenants like, the city should have all facilities meet at, by a certain date an existing threshold. You can make that recommendation.
If the last two buildings the school district built were LEED certified,
Mm-hmm.
anything the city does going forward should meet the same standard. That to me is kind of a basic, because we're all paying more money in school taxes than we are in city taxes.
Correct.
So the city ought to be able to meet the same standard going forward on that. That said, I don't see the city having to build a whole bunch of buildings, but I know what buildings the city's built in the last 8 years, and I know what retrofitting they're doing on buildings. And so there's no reason to not say, hey, you should get these buildings up to these standards, or work as close as you can to get them there.
Right.
And
then also having an ongoing statement that, in my opinion, it says, and you will continue to, meet whatever the next set of, certification programs are.
Right. I mean, I don't think that's a bad standard to have set, and a recommendation to come out of this board is to say, hey, when you're going to renovate, I mean, it's not going to apply right now with the renovations that are going on to, 265 is the building they're renovating right now. But, we've got fire stations that are going to have to be renovated in the next few years.
Yes.
And it's not a bad standard to say, hey, when you do that, or you do the Justice Center or any of the other city facilities, that you say, hey, no, bring them up to kind of modern standards and figure out, do you need new windows? Do you need new roofs? Do you need new HVAC? Do you need new weatherproofing? Whatever, to be able to do that, because that's saving the taxpayers money in the long run. And it's not a bad standard to hold the city to as a recommendation from this group. I see Aaron's like, he's writing something down. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think that's a bad standard for us to set for the city as a recommendation from this board. Because honestly, given, what I know of city council members, I think they'll actually buy into that standard.
Yeah.
I think city council and city staff will buy into that sort of standard. And I don't think that's a bad thing to come out of this set of recommendations on the stuff involving climate and buildings and energy use and the rest of it going forward. I mean, Jared, I like your point, which is, yeah, we probably need to get some sort of smart metering system on the city buildings, so we know exactly how much electricity is being used in each firehouse, how much electricity is being used at City Hall, how much electricity is being used at 265 Parkway, so that we can, how much electricity is being used at the Life Safety Park, to track those sorts of things, so that long term we know, okay, well, which buildings do we need to put more efficiency into? Is it we have to prioritize. Is it the senior center or the Life Safety Park? They're built at very different times, but you don't know how efficient each one of them is, given how they're used and the rest, or do we need to be spending more money to put more insulation in the animal services building? Right. And the only way you're going to know that is if you've got a smart electric metering system on those city buildings.
Aaron, do you know what the certification process is?
Yeah, it starts with documenting all of your policies and then providing proof that you followed through with those policies. Said purchasing policies and vendor vetting and chemical usage. And then you layer on top of that the actual water and energy consumption. And then you go through an audit is really what it ends up being. And so the future, the 2040 statement being set a standard for new and retrofit construction to meet lead standards. I can be our recommendation. But the reality is that starts with Jared and team starting to track the energy, starting to implement those policies, because you can't just 2039 show up and say, okay, we want to be lead. You have to start it now. So I think
when you said like document water and electric usage or whatever, that would be coming from right now, like Jared said, going through the electric bill and right? I mean, we don't have a method by which to do that quickly.
Correct.
Yeah.
So going back to what Patrick was saying, we know that the two most recent buildings are LEED certified, but now we're talking about 2040 and beyond. And there is a certain life cycle to a building after which perhaps even this elementary school will be bad. So given that we know as a city we want to be on the good side of climate change and green, should we be saying something like Coppell should target to be in the top 1% of cities in Texas or Midwest in terms of green initiatives? Is that a high enough goal that we can set?
Yeah, I mean, I think that stating a goal is a great concept. I honestly don't know what the offsets, expense-wise, effort, and are we even close to achieving that? And we don't have to be close. We just have to be willing to make the move to get there in the next 19 years. So,
the only comment I can add to that is it's validating that scenario, because what I would say is it's easy. I mean, I believe that Coppell and maybe some of the suburbs are in a place where they would actually track their information. I can tell you, City of Dallas is an animal, and to be able to compare us to them is just a different scenario. So I think we need to, if we're going to make an assessment like that, it would be a similar sized city, and it's just so different between Dallas and Coppell and Coppell and Fort Worth, for example. The number of buildings, the number of things that are involved. So
newer cities our size already have that much further ahead of us. As newer cities start expanding to our size.
Yeah. So it's consideration for that recommendation.
And that's a good point, Jared. I think we should, as a city, pick a benchmark and say we are going to measure ourselves to this benchmark and set an aggressive target of whatever that is, whether it's 1% or the top 50%, what have you, right? I mean, just we need to pick something. Kaylin has her hand up.
I was going to say, Kaylin's had her hand up, so she gets to go next.
Well, it's a different idea, but I mean, so I think I'm tracking better. Thank you for kind of reminding me what we're doing. I haven't heard us talk about businesses. We've talked about city and we've talked about residents. Is there room to make a recommendation or to talk about how the city could impose some impactful policies on businesses in the city, or is that not something the group is interested in doing?
I think we're highly interested, but Jared, correct me, I don't know that we have the authority.
So I think this goes back to what Patrick was saying, that sometimes Coppell's ability is overridden by what the governor does. And the reality is, I think even in Coppell, the city does have guidelines for businesses, and the city can choose to get tougher or more relaxed with those guidelines. So I would say, Kaylin, that we do have a scope. We just have to be very careful and be realistic whether it can be implemented. So, sorry.
That makes sense. Well, and like we could word it I mean, you guys are talking about incentives for residents. Like, I'm not saying it has to be a law or something, but it could be, you know, businesses get some sort of incentive, whatever that may be, to have better green policies. I mean, I don't know, like from a percentage of businesses in Coppell, maybe I should know this, but I don't know what percentage are city, what percentage are resident, what percentage are businesses. So it could be that it's not maybe as impactful, but if we're going to incentivize residents, I think I would like to propose something that the city consider for businesses as well.
I absolutely agree with you. That's just my personal opinion. Businesses sometimes are forgotten in the conversation when it comes to these types of programs because it really is the residents, and then we focus on, of course, what we do. But the business side, we definitely have limited ability to require businesses to do X, Y, or Z. But to your point, incentivizing them to, I don't even know, just provide us their data on what they are consuming would be, impactful for us. Because then perhaps we could say as a city, our footprint is X, because now we are able to get information perhaps from the resident and from the business, and of course Coppell's tracking theirs. So here's the overall what the city of Coppell is doing. I think it's a great point. I think there's no reason why you couldn't make a recommendation. Again, it gets tricky in the legislative stuff that we've got. We can continue to lose our ability to require businesses to do certain things, building materials, for example. But we can definitely say we would like for you to. And if you're willing to do it, we can help you with X, whatever that is. So yeah.
There's other cities in other states that have ordinances that require reporting of consumption data to the city. And then the more progressive of those cities, DC and New York, Manhattan, put in, Manhattan's rolling out a giant carbon tax to its buildings. But to Jared's point, everyone's point, I don't think Texas has the authority to do that at a municipal level. But it's very trackable. Most companies do it. Amazon and others tout that they are, and so it would be a matter of the city connecting with them to help track their consumption data, and then at least use that data to make policies move forward.
I think, Aaron, you make a good point. When we as a city demonstrate that we are green conscious, companies like Amazon will have an preference to come to us than somewhere else.
Yeah.
We like to think so. We promote a lot of things when we get companies to come to Coppell. I will tell you that 9 times out of 10, it falls down to proximity to rail and the airport, and then good education. So what the city is doing beyond infrastructure sometimes is kind of one of the lower rungs of the evaluation criteria for a business coming to Coppell. But I absolutely think it's worth saying, hey, this is what we do. And we're looking for folks that are similar in nature. It's more of a culture conversation, in my opinion. You're looking for the right culture fit. Thanks for the smile, Pat.
I'm snickering because I've seen one Aaron have to open a door for a dog, and another one have to deal with the child. So it's just with 2, yeah. So welcome to COVID world.
All right, I have some good notes. I think we can develop some recommendations with. Does anybody have anything that they want to put on the table for recommendations before we close that out?
Aaron, if I may, given that we had some nice discussion, do you think we should, as a larger group, think about specifically the green initiatives, 2040 and beyond, and the guidelines that we would like to give to the city, and then come back in the next call and document them, and then see where we are?
Yeah, I think we made a lot of progress fleshing out what exactly are we being asked of. And so yeah, we put that on the homework being come up with some initiatives or some bullets to can we send them to Tiffany and have her aggregate them ahead of next meeting, and then we can come prepared having read them, and then we can make comments on them.
Sure. After this call, Tiffany, I will send the points that I had listed in my Word document. And if it's okay, please share with everyone, and maybe they can use that as a launching pad.
Okay, I could do that. I could put it on the SharePoint.
All right.
And to Jared's question, I would like to meet in person.
Yeah. Do we wanna go around the room and talk about that, Jared?
Are we on to our next agenda item then?
That's what I was going to say. If we're saying we're done with that agenda item, we're moving on to the next one, which is to talk about the next meetings. And so,
yeah, so there's two things we want to talk about in the next meetings. One being the next pillar, and who wants to talk about that, and then just have a 10-minute conversation to steer that, so that that person or people can come prepared next meeting. And then the second piece pertains to how do we want to meet moving forward. Had we previously decided on an order? I don't recall doing that.
And I know last call, Patrick had some thoughts on it. And I'm okay with what the next topic is. So
I remember Patrick going in the first order of things he didn't want to talk about.
I think we had talked about asking or like trying to understand, I think from Jared, what the city leaders would be potentially most interested, like let them tell us what to prioritize.
it was a circular argument.
That's fair. I remember that too.
Yeah, and so that's what it came back to me with was, well, you guys tell us what's important. So it's kind of, I think we're good. So what I will tell you what I've heard so far is for the next meeting, we're definitely coming back with the bullets from today's session to then make recommendations for that pillar. And then the question is, will there'll be enough time following that conversation to start to introduce the next portfolio would be my question. Or do we want to just focus on getting the recommendations for this one next meeting and then go to the next one?
My 2 cents are, I think we should take the time to flesh out this pillar and go through each of our recommendation and frame it in a way that it can be a recommendation for the city. And my concern is if we pick up another pillar and we assign it to 2 of you, then definitely the 2 of you will be focused on that pillar. So it's kind of unfair to ask you to be working on 2 pillars at the same time.
And honestly, of the pillars we have, I think this is one of the most important ones.
And I think we, or at least in my head, we talked about how it'd be kind of nice before we do like an official discussion, like tonight, the month before we kind of talk, maybe like a little reset. So here's the pillar we're going to cover next time. Here's some of the things currently going on in the city or otherwise, like getting our minds in the right headspace, maybe some discussion, some questions. I think that was like the presenters could be then maybe kind of pointed in a certain direction based on that initial discussion, and then take that for the next month. And I think I'm not going to be here next month if we're doing the meeting the first week like we normally do. So I won't be here, but that's what, if I was going to present, I would want to talk about it with you guys first before I just jump into a brand new topic.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. If we pick the next topic now, then we can give Jared homework to catch us up to speed next month on what the city is currently doing within the realm of that pillar. And then we can leave with the homework of researching so that we can stay on track and have a good cadence then for future months. So I would like to dive into connected homes personally, but I'm open to.
Sorry, Aaron, what was that you said?
So if we're looking to give Jared some homework on what pillar we're going to introduce in the second half of next meeting,
Right.
I would like to do the connected homes, pillar 5, but I'm not completely dead set on that. So I look for feedback.
It's as good as any. So I second it.
All right.
We all need connected homes right now, as we're still all working from home and the rest of it, which probably presages the next part of the discussion we're going to have.
Yeah. So the next meeting we'll finish pillar 2, and then Jared will give us an intro on the pillar 5, and we'll start that conversation. And so, what's everybody's opinion on the Zoom versus in person? I'll go since I'm already talking, but I'm 100% comfortable meeting in person. But I'm also 100% used to the convenience of Zoom. And so I would like to see a hybrid meeting in person once a quarter and on Zoom twice a quarter. But I wouldn't be opposed to getting back in person for a couple meetings. We have some people on the panel now that we've never personally met. So, any other thoughts on that?
On my behalf, I completely like the meet twice on Zoom and meet once in person per quarter. I have my vaccine. I prefer meeting outdoors and prefer not being indoors, but I'm okay.
Where do y'all usually meet in person?
It was the second floor conference room upstairs in the town center. But we're very flexible. I can make it available just pretty much any of our facilities, as long as there's nothing else booked during our time. I can make those facilities available.
That room seems pretty big to me, so I'm cool. I'm cool with 100% in person or whatever y'all decide, but Zoom is difficult for me because obviously the kids, they don't have very many boundaries.
Okay.
I'm willing to meet in person. I will say, I'm in a situation where I've started actually going back to my office. Which is kind of strange after a year of barely being there. So I'm willing to do in person, and I would say, Jared, I know council's gone back to pretty much meeting in person, and they've put up the barriers in the council chamber. So if we wanted to use the council chamber, we could, because they put glass barriers up between each of the seats. So we would sit separated from each other there. So we could use that space. I get Ramesh's thing about wanting more space and, trying to do a meeting outside, I don't think is really an option. If we're going to have any sort of citizens appearance and the rest, which we really, one of the things that we've really missed in the course of this being on this board the whole time, and I've brought this up several times prior to Aaron and Kaylin joining, is we have had no citizen input. And so I think if we're willing to go back and do part of it in person, or, maybe we have half of the people in person and half of the people on Zoom, because I know that's gone on some of the boards, over the last year, we can do that. But going back to where there's some possibility, of, and I know even city council has just started this last meeting. When I watched the last meeting, was the first time I had seen people show up in person to speak in almost a year. And I mean, again, I'm a political scientist, so I'm kind of a junkie. I'll watch a city council meeting in my community. And that was really, and Jared, you can confirm or disconfirm this for me, but that was really one of the first times I had seen in the last year that like people were showing up for a city council meeting and participating in person. And I feel like, for those who are vaccinated or about to be vaccinated and are comfortable with being back with people in public, I think, as part of being on a city board, it's kind of incumbent on us to consider at least some of us being in person, for whatever reason, and actually being present to the public on that board. Because I think there are people in town who are going to be interested in what we've been talking about. And I think it's important that we have that availability to them.
Okay. All right. So what I heard is at least one in person and then 2 Zooms per quarter. And if we choose for the next meeting to be in person, right now I'll target for the second floor conference room because that is a very large room. And I think it bolds better than the dais because we can actually see each other. So we can, collaborate that way. The dais where the council sits, while there's dividers, they're looking typically at a presenter and not necessarily each other. And so for this group, I think the second floor would be a better place. Yeah. So if everybody's good, I say we meet in person in the second floor next month. And Kaylin, you can't come. Is that what I heard? Okay. I will throw out the alternative is we can still have the Zoom up, which we probably will, if there is a citizen that would like to join, they can. So we'll probably have the Zoom going anyway, just filming the room, but I'll throw that out there. If for whatever reason, somebody changes their mind between now and then, or one of the other members isn't as comfortable coming in person, we could still do a Zoom hybrid meeting. So
I'll get the second floor booked. So in June, we wanting to do Zoom?
sounds like it.
Okay.
But we can adjust after the next meeting. We'll see how that goes. We all love being around each other again. And maybe in June we'll do it in person again. Sound good?
Sounds good.
All right.
Okay.
With that, we shall adjourn the meeting.
Move to adjourn.
I second.
All in favor? Can we vote on that?
Yeah,
Meeting
that's fine.
adjourned at
Yep.
7:55.
All right. Well, enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Aaron.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ramesh.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Have a nice evening.
All right. Good seeing everyone. Bye.
Yep.